Good morning, Brian Maxted here from the Holloway Group, and I'm here with Matthew Efird. I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little about your history here in the industry.
Sure. My name is Matthew Efird. I'm a fifth generation farmer here in Fresno, California. We farm almonds, walnuts, raisins, cannery peaches, and pistachios, and looking forward to our conversation today.
I really appreciate you taking the time to come out here and just talk about some of the issues that are affecting your industry, especially on the supply chain and what we're looking at with almonds.
Yeah, it's been concerning times this year, post-COVID, and some of the issues we're dealing with. Looking forward to outlining today. So
great. Well, let's get into it a little bit, and just this tee up sort of how we got to where we are now. So some of our viewers know that there's a problem with an oversupply of almonds, or at least not being able to get last year's crop of almonds out to its various international markets. Can you talk a little bit about how we got here and what that issue looks like?
So we've had a couple large crops, and on the heels of that, we've got COVID, and with COVID came supply chain shipping issues, and so really it boils down to that California produces a fair amount of almonds for the world, and about 80% of those are exported. And so we're dependent on these container ships and means of transportation to get these almonds out of California. With COVID and the lockdowns, we've just had a backlog of containers, and then subsequent issues in the supply chain at ports and shipping throughout the world. So our biggest issue right now is just trying to figure out how do we get our product out of California. Not a lot of people realize this, but West Coast ports, you get container ships come into Port of Long Beach, unload there, go to Port of Oakland, load up with ag commodities, and then exit and distribute from the rest of the world from there. And so with the congestion we've had in these different areas and the demand that there is for consumer goods coming from overseas, rather than wait in line, a lot of these container ships are just opting to head back and get another load. And so we're not able to get these containers on these ships, and this has been a compounding problem. So with the inability to ship comes also the burden of storing this product. And so so what we've been doing is we've been working as an industry with the Almond Alliance and our fellow legislators here in California, and both local and state and federal level, to come up with a means to facilitate this movement of goods. And so we're looking at rail, we're looking at a combination of different ports, Houston, over in Louisiana. East Coast ports don't tend to be as congested, and so we're trying to find a way and a means to kind of look at the whole shipping supply chain in a different light, not maybe just the West Coast ports we've been primarily focused, but now looking a little bit more nationally. With that comes additional cost.
Sure. So yeah, let's talk about that. The impetus of the issue. Dig into it a little bit more. So historically, before the pandemic, containers would come into the Port of LA, or ships would come into the Port of LA and empty their containers full of goods, whatever those would be, and then those ships would then take containers and move up to the Port of Oakland, or would they also load a material or ag materials in LA, or do most ag materials get historically loaded in Oakland? What's that supply chain look like as far as?
Well, of course, any port we're looking to optimize, but just from the Central Valley and California's breadbasket, if you will, the Port of Oakland becomes our most logistical outlet. And so I've got friends of mine that grow hay in the Imperial Valley, and they'll press that hay and they'll deliver it to Port of Long Beach, where it'll get loaded on that ship. But that ship's ultimately going to swing by Oakland on its way out. And so where we are here in Central California, I'm also a director at Blue Diamond Growers. And so our cooperative is located primarily in Salida, Sacramento, and Turlock. And so for us, we're moving product to the Port of Oakland and trying to use that as our main hub to ship.
It's only an hour away. Sacramento and those areas are about an hour and a half away from the Port of Oakland.
So rather than put it on a truck and have to go all the way down to Long Beach, it just logistically made more sense there. So that's where we were focusing on, and again, our whole supply chain had evolved to just in time, and so we're bringing product in, we're taking it to a distribution warehouse and distributing that product. Those containers are freeing up; they're down being transferred to another business that wants to export their product. They're now loaded and then they get back on the ship. And what's happened is, with the disruption due to COVID and international shutdowns, is you've just got these backlogs, not only getting these containers off the ships themselves, but then getting them to dry edge ports that are outside of the port, and where are the extra warehousing, and how do we get that product warehoused so we can get that container empty. And so it's just created this this backlog. And so,
and let me just interrupt real quick there, just to understand that aspect of the shipping problem. So with the backlogs that have happened, a 30, 45 day waiting period for these imports to even come in and be able to unload in usually the port of LA or sometimes the port of Oakland, but usually going to LA first as far as how the markets go for ag. And these shippers are now making the decision because it took them so long to unload, and there's such a demand for them to bring more goods to the U.S., partly because of our lag of good demand from the pandemic, goods being increases and people spending less on services, that they're making the decision that they don't want to wait to load containers full of the exports, and then they just turn and burn and go back to pick up more goods to bring them back. And for them, they find it's more profitable, or they're making the choice to do that. Now, can you speak a little bit also to the carrier issue as far as who controls the carriers, and what their interests are, and how that doesn't align necessarily with what our export cycle here in the U.S. should look like?
Sure. I mean, the carriers are businesses like anybody else, and so they're looking to be as profitable as they can. Most of the international shipping companies are just that. They're international. They're not domestic. And so we really don't have a regulatory arm to where we can, force somebody to take these containers. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with these international carrier groups, say, hey, what do you need? Where can we go to ship our product and get our product out? And if it's not going to be West Coast ports for a multitude of reasons, what other options do we have? And so engaging in that conversation, kind of getting outside the box from a perspective of, this is what we're accustomed to doing versus this is what can facilitate that cargo to be loaded and shipped. Most of these carriers are saying, hey, we're looking at, the Gulf ports and the East Coast ports. Well, again, with that comes shipping costs that are going to be built into these. But if we need to move product, we need to move product. And so again, it's taken a lot of outreach, discussion, engagement from multiple groups and levels to come up with some sort of solution to where we can try as an industry to get this product shipped out. And so right now we're estimating we're going to have in excess of an 800 million pound carry out.
Almost
and
a billion pounds.
Almost a billion pounds. And so a lot of that is not a lack of consumer demand. It's mainly been an issue related to shipping. The extended lead shipping times. Some buyers bought in advance and got product shipped early, and they've been eating through that product and those sales, and so now they're ready to bring some more product in because they've exhausted those that storage that they had, but now they're finding it's going to take 3 months to get an almond from California to somewhere international. That's a very, I guess, new perspective for even the buyers. And so it's a conversation of having all those different groups together and combined and saying, hey, this is our issue. How do we get around it? How's the best way to work through it? So, but it's very concerning to us as growers because it's going to create a carry out that we're not accustomed to having, and we're going to create subsequent more storage issues for us, both from a bulk storage standpoint to some almonds are stored in bins, and so we're going to have bin shortages, and so we're trying to prepare for this upcoming crop. It's going to be here before we know it.
I mean, let's look at these trees, just right behind you. It's got a nice crop. This is one of your farms that you farm here around the Fresno area, and this is going to be a good crop this year. And for those who are south of a certain longitude,
the frost that we had in the spring was unfortunate. It really affected predominantly Central California north, Central Valley south, not as bad. I think there's a multitude of reasons that it worked out that way. But harvest is going to be here before we know it, and we need to make sure that our handlers are ready to receive product once the hauler shellers run it. And we as growers are already having to deal with input increases throughout the year, inflationary pressures there. Again, the input costs are being driven by inability to ship these chemicals and these fertilizers from their international destinations to here, and so it's a supply constraint there that is raising prices and availability for what we need to do here on the farm.
So I really want to get into that conversation about some of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing as farmers, but just put that aside for a second and talk just a little bit more about this supply chain issue. And it's June now, harvest starts in August, September. So we have to solve that issue this summer, right? We're talking 3 months approximately to figure out how to gain capacity. And right now, a lot of these, cold storage areas, they're full, right? And they had to build extra capacity in a very short period of time, but those are full.
Yeah.
And now you're gonna get a whole new crop in there. And so getting this solved in the next 3 months, there's urgency that really exists here because along with the inflationary challenges that we'll talk about in a second, you also have the potential for demand destruction, right? From consumers that they're going to eat something. If they didn't get their almond shipments, they're going to eat something, right? And so those markets gone now. Question, don't know the answer to that. But then with that extra capacity, the effect on price, right? Supply is up, even though it's hard to get it, but then it's readily available if you can get your hands on the shipping for it. And so that is having a decreased pressure on price while you have an oversupply and you have rising costs for inputs.
Right.
And each trees, they usually have a life cycle of 20, 25 years for almonds?
Yeah, typically that's what we plan for. Used to be 25 years, but some of the newer varieties, intense production, 20 years is what we're looking at when we make that investment. And it takes us 3 to 5 years to get that into a nice, strong economic producing window. And so we've got really 15 years of production off of these trees once we make that commitment. And so just to be able to turn something on and turn it off and turn it back on again it's not realistic.
Right, you're not switching from wheat to corn to cotton, or these are not these things are they're massive, obviously, and it's a lot of effort to get the trees ready to go in, a lot of effort to take them out and redevelop once its life cycle is done. And so there are investments that you're going to live with in this life cycle as these troughs happen. But this is a shock to the system that we don't know what the effect's going to be here, depending on what can happen over the next 3 months with alleviating some of these supply constraints to get them to market. And what ultimately that will mean that inventories will remain higher, maybe if we can get the crop out. But if we can't, then what does that mean for the market? And that's where this is a window to solve that problem. So what are some of can you talk a little more about some of the solutions that people are doing and thinking about what the cost effects of that ultimately are?
Well, the most drastic approach on the farm is going to be that you have to cut your input costs. Your pest management, you might choose not to grow such a high quality nut and forego some of those sprays and the expense of those sprays, which isn't good.
Right.
There's the issue of fertilizer inputs. Almonds are aggressively growing tree, high nitrogen demand to fill these nuts and to size these nuts, and with some of our commodity nitrogen prices just tripling from where they were last year, a lot of growers are probably looking at, boy, do I really need to apply that much nitrogen? And maybe I can cut my budget by 30%, 50%. Again, that's going to have a ramification on the quality of the crop, the size of the nut, but at least you're still maintaining your tree. The thing that we can't cut out is water. When you start cutting water and you put a tree in a stress cycle, almonds trees to be fully productive do not like stress.
Sure.
And so we do everything we can to mitigate that. But those that are relying upon surface water, that's a very real concern because we just don't have this surface water this year. We're in the second year of a drought and didn't have the snowpack this year, and so my district here, specifically where we're standing, I'm looking at just one single turn, which is probably going to be about 15 days of water, and that's about it. Everything else, we're relying on our groundwater pumping, and we're fortunate here that we have good quality groundwater. But in other areas, that's not the case, and so now you might be putting some water that's high in boron or higher in salts, and what's that detriment going to be to the tree long term? So when we get back to these inputs, it's which leg of the stool do you kick, and there's going to be a ramification no matter what you do. But at the same time, we've got inflationary pressure on wages. As we all know, fuel is through the roof, and so you've got just the cost of feeding the equipment that we're out here operating. The equipment itself, if you can get it, is extremely expensive. Everything's gone up, probably 20-25% in just cost of equipment over the last several years. And so and I had one manufacturer that told me that they're not even going to be able to deliver the amount of units that they had committed to their dealerships, because they're waiting on parts from the manufacturer that makes the engine. And so, kind of like a lot of the people see it at the store with cars. Hey, I can't get car's not there. Well, we're waiting on a computer chip somewhere. It's the same thing in ag, and we're facing those same pressures.
So that's just really an important, I think, conversation point to dig into a little bit, because people, consumers are facing this 8% inflationary measure, and fuel prices and food prices are one of the biggest drivers in that. And so to talk a little about the headwinds that are facing ag and why those food prices are increasing. So let's talk a little bit, we summarized some of those, which are water shortages here, the cost of inputs, both because of the decrease in production of oil and natural gas, both for international reasons, the war in Ukraine, but also just our own choices on deciding to not ramp up production. The labor shortage that we're facing, and the crisis of really increasing wages to meet the demand for labor, which seems like a good thing, but it continues to spiral up. And as things cost more, those wages are not keeping up, and they can't keep up ultimately. And so you have all these inflationary pressures that are facing this industry, and it's not just one, but it's a multitude. And everything that happens on the farm is done with fuel, right? It's done with diesel fuel. So people need to understand, like this, to eat, you need to have hydrocarbons to help you eat in this time. It's love to get to a world that can get diversified away from that. But today, where we are now, in bridging to that world, we need to eat. And so, getting into that conversation, people not understanding always all the elements that go into where their food comes from. The conversation piece you hear out there, well, we don't need to grow in California. We don't need to grow as much in California. Can you talk a little bit about really what growing in this 100-mile magic circle in this area of California means to just domestic food production and output?
Sure. I'm the immediate past president of Fresno County Farm Bureau as well. And one of the things that's resonated from that experience is the fact that just Fresno County alone grows over 400 different crops.
400 different crops.
So,
wow.
We've got this beautiful Mediterranean climate. We've got some of the highest quality soils in the world that allow us to do what we do as efficient as we do it and as productively as we do it. And to say that, hey, we're going to curtail something and take agriculture away from this region, not only would it be economically detrimental to all of the towns and cities and employees that rely on that ag economy, but it'd be detrimental to the world, because the fresh fruits and vegetables that come out of just this county alone is just it's astounding. And so there's been a thought, and I've had these conversations with legislators over the years that hey, we'll import our food if we need to, and that's fine and dandy, but food security is a big issue, and you look at it globally right now, and I think even more so, I think that's going to resonate with people. But being that we have our food security, we've got the ability to do it as safely as possible, as efficiently as possible, and as close to the end consumer as possible, being right here in Central California, and serving the nation and globally.
And close to the ports.
And close to the ports.
If they pick up our exports.
If they pick up our exports. But the point being is just we have an opportunity to do it better than anywhere else in the world. And so if we really want to start getting into the theology of your footprint, and your what does that global footprint look like, and your inputs, and the diesel we're burning to create this, we are in the best spot to do it versus anywhere else in the world.
Right, as efficiently as possible. So every input of diesel that's going into producing, the nutrients, and we're not just talking about basic carbs, we're talking about the nutrients that we need to have be healthy as a society.
Yep.
These are almonds, these are berries, these are fruits, these are vegetables. These are the nutrients that they always tell us we should be eating more of, because it's going to be that which powers us in the most efficient way and gives us the best nutrition and doesn't cause some of the health problems that making different choices necessarily
cause.
cause.
The technologies we use to get there. I mean, that's the other thing, is the technological advancements that we have that are driven by the commodity values that we have. I mean, it's hard to go out and buy cutting edge technology, $200,000-$300,000 spray rigs that are autonomous and utilizing the soil science and the plant science that we use to make sure that we're giving the nutrition to the tree that we need, and not more,
right,
not less. I mean, I always jokingly say, hey, why would I apply excess fertilizer? Why would I do an undue chemical application? I might as well take a $100 bill out of my pocket and light it on fire. It's pointless, right? So I'm using technologies to determine what to do there. And then, as far as water application, I mean, we're using probes and sensors and CIMA stations and weather stations, and we're using, evapotranspiration and all these things that we've created to use water as efficiently as possible. Do you think there's other places in the world, on a global scale, as large as we farm here in California, that are using these technologies and implementing all that into whatever production they're doing? And then they have to ship it to us. It just makes no sense to me, because we're right here in the valley, and we've got all these wonderful crops that are growing with our regulations that we have to comply with, and food safety, and all the wonderful things that we do as growers that we've had to adapt to over the years to give a consumer a healthy, good product.
And that domestic production here within that 100 mile magic circle produces something like 98% of a lot of our fresh vegetables and nuts, and something like 75% of our citrus. And the percentages, and we'll put it online of what these look like, are outstanding of what comes from this just 100-mile area of amazing climate, so you can grow mostly year-round and grow crops you can't grow anywhere else because there's frost issues, or there's climate issues, or bug issues, or whatever. And that diversity and abundance, I mean, is what gives us this amazing food security, not just on basic calories, but nutrition. And we're making choices against that. And let's talk about one of the main choices against that, which is some of the water challenges that we face. So California, since its existence, has had droughts, right? Drought years, not drought years, come in drought years. But back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, California invested in its water infrastructure, and we have one of the most, historically, have one of the most sophisticated systems of irrigations and reservoirs and capturing water, and it's still in existence today. It hasn't had as much upkeep as it needs to be. But talk a little bit about the water challenges and the choices that are being made on a policy level, and the ramifications that can have over time.
Sure. So there's a lot of different demands on our water infrastructure. Primarily a lot of the water infrastructure is put in for flood control, and then we then adapted that to irrigation, and as policy shifted, there's an environmental concern that went with our water use, and so certain species that are under stress needed additional water supplies for that, whether it was waterfowl out in the grasslands or the delta, or some of the delta smelt so many people have heard about that's endangered in the delta, Sacramento Delta. There's different strains that come on it, and so one of the things that is frustrating for us as agriculturalists is we need water to do what we do, and it's a basis of what we do, and we just feel like the system's being mismanaged, and it's not that one has a priority over the other. I think there's still a lot of ability for us to come to real common sense solutions, but it's just the utilization of it. There's a reality that in the Delta there needs to be outflows to offset and mitigate saltwater intrusion.
Sure.
But those outflows exceed what we need to mitigate that saltwater intrusion. But then there's also an environmental need, and a need for cold water temperatures at different spawning cycles for different fish. And so the very dams that we're using to store this product, this water, for our use is also being used to store water just for temperature control in these rivers. And the sad reality is over years and years and years of trying to implement these policies to influence this environmental change, we haven't really seen a lot of success from it.
Right.
Now, whether that's some of just the theories that the timing of water or the temperature of water, that can be debated. But the reality is that water is not being used for what we as humans need.
Right.
And so in my area, I'm not really reliant upon water that comes north of Sacramento and in the Delta. But our conveyance system was designed to where it could send that down to Kern County and those different areas, or out on the west side. And with these curtailments of water not being able to move south for a multitude of reasons, what that's causing is now agriculture to rely on our aquifer and our underground water table. And so with the curtailments of the water and the system that was built to sustain that, with that being removed from the equation, we're now relying upon pumping this water. And so what we're doing is we're depleting our aquifer faster than we're replenishing it. And so our regulators recognized that this was becoming an issue, and so they started with something called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. And so we were charged as different basins throughout California to come up with sustainability models. And so we're not quite 5 years into that first plan that we've set out to the regulatory agencies to review, and we're working on implementation of these plans. A lot of it's still data collection,
Right.
But the reality is back-to-back drought years is not helping what our sustainable yields are looking like right now with SGMA. But yet we still have curtailments up in the Delta, and even the Delta this year. There's rice that's not being planted because there's not water available if you look at some of our reservoirs. And so there's a need for, as you mentioned, an investment in infrastructure. I can't tell you the last time there was any dams that have been built. If anything, we're tearing down dams, right? And that's something
Tragic, yeah.
for people to look into as well. But a lot of the licensing agreements for the use of the dams always has an environmental demand as far as that water. And so we've got to recognize, how do we come up with this balance? And unfortunately, I think if I understand correctly, there's a prediction that we could see 1 million to 1.5 million acres fallowed of prime productive farmland, just because we're not going to have the water for it.
Wow.
And what's that impact going to be? Take that out of the food system.
Just the decrease in what that production is going to look from a domestic basis, and part of our food security. And so is it preventable? I guess that's the question, are there choices we can be making with water infrastructure, with water usage, with some harder choices that might have to have some trade-offs with environmental choices or technology that can be helpful in solving this other looming crisis domestically of our food production here in California. What are some of the solutions that have been posited as potential answers?
So with the development of SGMA, again, each basin is responsible for coming up with its own local solution, basically. How are you going to meet your sustainable yield? Different basins have different volumes or amounts of surface water in any given year, or a historical average that they have as inflows into that basin. And so you're basically looking at trying to come up with a balance between extraction and importation of water. Again, because of the environmental concerns in the Delta and some of the challenges that are there, we can no longer rely on that water coming down and coming south to where water heavy in the north and a little drier to the south here in the Central Valley. So in the different GSAs and that I farm in, there's been anything from again, fouling, curtailment. You're going to be limited to the amount of acre feet of water that you can extract in any given year. So let's say on my operation, for example, one of my irrigation districts, I'm probably going to be able to continue to farm the way that I am. We've got enough water on an average rainfall event where we're gonna be okay, and we're gonna be able to continue to farm 100% of our acreage. I've got the extreme of another irrigation district where I'm probably gonna have to fallow at least 50% of my land
50%
out there. And then I've got other districts where it's kind of in between. And so, so to your point, we've made an investment in trees, and it's a 20-year investment, but it's also a 20-year life cycle. So as I start to redevelop certain orchards, I'm thinking long term. Hey, what's this look like? Maybe these almonds, when they're done, they come out, and this goes to an annual crop. And if I don't have water, then it just lies fallow.
Right.
For us, we're rotating about 80 to 160 acres a year that we're redeveloping consistently on our ranch. And so, over that cycle, I'm just going to have to continue to evaluate, and it's moving the goalposts. I mean,
Sure.
I thought I knew something 5 years ago, and what I know today would have definitely changed some of the decision making I made 5 years ago, but I've already committed to that. So, I can just use my best guess and move forward, and that's just strictly on the water side of things, the regulatory side and these other,
headwinds
that come along. I mean, they just add more difficulty to the equation. So
and just on the water issue, before getting off it, the other big competing use for water is both cities, and that's water coming from the mountains and the valley into the major cities here in California and the West Coast generally, and then industrial uses as well. And so, the talk a little bit about the other choices that some cities have looked into. Obviously, down near San Diego, Carlsbad, I think finally has a desal plant up and running. I think it's a 50,000 acre foot desal plant per year, which is something. That's helping that supply. And so California's next to an ocean. There's a lot of water out there. Obviously, you can't use it for ag without modifying it through technology. But is that a solution that California should be looking at? Specifically, California should be looking at.
Again, I think you got to put everything on the table. Everything from additional water storage. We are looking at different weather patterns that are coming in. So the projection is that we're going to have less snowpack that we relied on in the past to have that slow release of water throughout the summer, and more rainfall where we need to have those immediate capture events. So we need to consider additional storage there. We need to consider better water use and management. All of my orchards are micro irrigated, but there's still people that flood irrigate, and so what's the optimal use of that water? And I think Sigma is going to really kind of force people to adapt to new technologies and irrigation systems.
Right.
We're going to have to identify, there's places that drip irrigation's allowed us to farm that we've never been able to farm before.
Right.
Well, there's a debate out there, should those places still be farmed? Because they shouldn't have been farmed before. And I'm not going to get into that, but there is going to be a reality of what's the optimal land use. I mean, in my situation, I'm looking at, if I have problem soils, that's probably going to be a location that I'm going to fallow first, and I'm going to keep my prime, farm ground in production. But to your point, I mean, desal I think is a great opportunity to take advantage of the water that's out there. If we look at some of our international friends, I mean, look what they're doing in the Middle East with. That's
amazing
water.
what they're doing.
I mean,
Israel
and drip technology has come from Israel, and the desal plants that they have over there, it's just amazing what they can
solar powered desal plants. So nice green water and
so I think what you get is you're in an arid region where they live, and you don't have the option. You have to come up with a solution. Right now in California, we've still got our historical solutions, and I think we need to just look and say, okay, moving forward, what are our options going to be? I mean, are we going to be in a have to? Well, I don't like being in a have-to situation with the pace of progress in California, because it takes forever to get anything implemented. We all know, just driving on the freeways, we can't even get a freeway project done in less than 5 years. So, much less.
Well, the train's coming. So
yeah, we got this. Yeah. we'll avoid that conversation. But yeah, it's just look at what our forefathers did. They saw what California could be. They saw the needs that were coming, and they built the infrastructure. And then we just basically were content on our laurels, and we haven't done anything since. And I believe the last major infrastructure project was back in the early 70s.
Well, wasn't there $1 trillion infrastructure package that was just passed? Is there any allocation for water infrastructure from that, or the state?
It's a yes but caveat. I mean, if you look at all of the water bonds that have been passed over the years and the results of those, it's typically gearing more towards efficiencies and water savings and those types of measures, not necessarily infrastructure for storage and conveyance, which is what we really need. Subsidence is a big issue, and that's also part of SGMA. Is we're trying to mitigate subsidence, and with subsidence comes a lack of efficiency in our water transfer systems. And so, you look at where this money is being spent. It's not really being spent on true hard infrastructure projects. It's kind of these other
more pet project
type things, and then there's just there's the bureaucracy that gets tied into it and the waste that goes with that, and it's inherent to our system. But at the end of the day, we need to have hard and fast infrastructure projects and additional storage. I mean, rainfall capture events are going to be our key to managing our water situations out here, and being able to use ponding basins to percolate back into the aquifer, because that aquifer is there and it's manageable. It's just we need to have the inflows to offset the outflows,
especially without the snow trickling it in through time. It's going to be happening instead over winter all at once or at periods. I mean, this last winter up in Sacramento, in December we had like that huge rain event, 15 inches of rain. A lot of that just ended up going
that's right
out to the and some of it obviously went to the groundwater and restoring those basins, but much of that flowed out.
It was wasted, and there's there's different and I'm no water expert, but my understanding is there's different parameters that the system has to work and operate within before they can turn on the pumps and start capturing some of that water to bring it down our aqueduct system and bringing it south. And here we've got these huge rain events, and that water's rushing along, and I mean they weren't able to ramp up very much to extract that water due to policies. And so I think it's back to a big holistic view of the water system and saying, okay, it's not the farmers, it's not the people, it's not the environment, it's all of us together. It's this California, and what's the best use of that natural resource that just seems to be we're not doing the best we could. So.
Right. We'll kind of try to have those conversations more and more. I know a lot of people are talking about it, but it seems like it's going in circles. So we'll keep on pushing till that circle gets busted out. I'll ask one last question here before we sign off. But just to recap some of the issues we got on almonds specifically, and other crops as well. But really, almonds getting hit the worst because it's an 80% export crop. Mm-hmm. You've got supply chain issues that have now an oversupply sitting, waiting to go out that can't get out on ships. You have water quality issues with drought years and lack of having invested in water infrastructure, which is making more and more fallow ground. You got rising inputs. 80% of 90% of everything that's done on the farm uses diesel to do so. Mm-hmm. And so that rising cost of just farming gets affected in every crop, everywhere. You got a labor shortage and labor costs that are rising. You have part supply issues on the tractors and machinery and sometimes drip tape and anything else that you need to farm. So with all those headwinds, every morning you wake up, what's that driving force that says, I'm going to keep on walking in this storm against this wind and get to the other side? What's your personal driving, mantra that keeps you going on a daily basis and moving forward?
When I was a young kid, I had a sandbox in my dad's backyard, mom and dad's backyard, and it was my little scale version of our ranch. And so I've wanted to farm my entire life. It's just a passion I have. It's something I enjoy doing. Enjoy the challenges of it and working outdoors. But at the end of the day, part of it's legacy, 5th generation, and God willing, my boys, I just want to have them have the opportunity to be able to come back and farm.
Sure.
It's the stewardship of the land while I have it. It's my responsibility while I'm taking care of it now until I pass it on to the next generation. So, with that responsibility comes just dealing with the hits that just seem to keep coming, and how can we make cuts here? How can we streamline things there? How can we be more efficient so that our operation continues to be profitable and we can pass it forward? It's just a commitment to our food system. I mean, every farmer realizes that we're feeding the consumer, and we call them consumers, but it's our fellow man. I mean,
right.
Less than 2% of the population is directly related in production agriculture. That's mind-blowing when you think about just our domestic population, much less a global population, and how few of us there are that are actually doing this. And I always reflect back to when I was at Cal Poly. There was a push to farm the farmer. It was go into the associated businesses that support farming, but don't be the producer, because that's the person that takes on all the risk and all the burden. And that's who I am. That's me, and I take that on. And so, it's just a commitment to what we've started and what we're going to continue to do, and we'll weather through the storm. I mean, farming's cyclical. I mean, we've seen commodity prices ebb and flow, and it's always in the back of our mind as we're doing developments and looking at cash flow and all these things that we're considering. And so for us, I think we're in a good position to weather the storm. We've vertically integrated ourselves throughout the farming system, but we're also members in a cooperative hauler, and we're members of a cooperative handler in Blue Diamond. And so that really kind of vertically integrates us through that whole system. And so it puts us in the best position we can to weather the storm. But for me, it's just a passion. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. I love the team that I have here on this operation that make it happen. And just I can't think of anything else that I'd really want to do, so.
Well, hard times don't last, but hard people do. And we just appreciate everything you do to push agriculture forward and keep food on the table. And it's always just a treasure and a pleasure talking to you, Matt. I just really appreciate your time.
No, it's always nice.
Good luck with everything, and really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, so. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate the time.
Thanks.